Thank you very much, Johannes. Well, first of all, a brief introduction. My name is Ali Mufti, and I'm joined here by my colleague Carol O. Young. We both represent the account management team at AXCO Insurance Information Services in London. So thank you very much for inviting us here to speak today. It's a privilege to come all the way to Stockholm and escape the rain, although it's a little bit colder than we expected, but no, it's a privilege and a beautiful city, so thank you. Today, we'll hopefully give you a little insight into some of the complexities in multinational insurance, particularly with a focus on compliance. I'll hand you over shortly to Carol, who will talk you through the substantive part of the presentation. But to build on what you said, Johannes, that compliance is a very tricky subject, particularly when you go global. So hopefully we'll give you some indication into some of the complexities that we encounter. Before we proceed on that stage, I thought I'd give you a brief introduction as to who AXCO are and what it is we do, in case you didn't know. So AXCO, let's start the slides. AXCO has been around for approximately 40 years. Our speciality is reporting on multinational or global insurance intelligence. So it's a particularly tricky subject, but we've been doing it for quite some time now. Not me personally, but I don't think I've been around for that long. Yeah, so business critical compliance and market data, and we span the sectors non-life, life, and also employee benefits. So quite expansive, the subject, and particularly when you reach a global span, it becomes quite complicated. But our focus tends to be on compliance and the regulatory environment, but we also look at aspects, market practices, and statistics and analysis, and across those sectors that we said. I mean, our information basically transcends many different areas of information. Any information that you think you might need when you're looking at another market, that's what we try and harness. It could be anything from the political environment, the general demographics of a country, spanning then into the compliance, then line of business specific information. It can be quite dense, the information, but today we're going to look specifically at compliance. And so who is AXCO's market? I mean, quite simply, it's the insurance industry. We fulfill the role that the insurance industry asks us to, in the sense that any insurance professional looking to venture into foreign markets, they need a certain level of information. It's far too inefficient and expensive for them to do it themselves, so that brought about AXCO's very existence some 40 years. So we fulfill that role on behalf of the market, and we're able to therefore report unbiased and independently. I mean, that's a very important topic that I'll get into in a little bit later. So naturally our market is the international, those insurance professionals who look at the international markets, who are looking to venture into cross-border territories, and that spans the world's foremost insurers, brokers, reinsurers, anyone really in the insurance industry, but also increasingly some risk managers as well, and direct the buyers as well. So AXCO's business model, I touched on it just then. It's we like to consider ourselves an outsourced information provider to the industry. So some 40 years ago, when our then director came up with the idea to fulfill that role, it's come on a lot since then. It started off just as a report, a paper report that was carried around Lloyd's and sold on a trolley, but it's developed a little more since then, particularly in response to the advancing technological needs. So in the past 5 years, we've advanced on a lot of technological platforms, questioning tools. It's a tricky area to venture into. But So just to elaborate a little further on our business model, mutualized outsourcing model, that's what we like to consider ourselves. The independence of AXCO is very important. If ERV is looking to go into another market in Africa, I mean, it'd be very difficult to get into the regulator's office and get all the questions that you need answered, as well as then to go to a potential competitor and get them to explain to you what the difficulties are of going into that market. I very much doubt they'll volunteer that information. So AXCO's existence as an independent outsourcer to the industry is a very important one, and one that's very much founded on trust. The industry trusts us to go out and get the information, and we trust the industry to support us in that endeavor. Long-term partnerships, that's a very crucial part and central to our existence. Over the years, we've established very important relations with our information sources, so the regulators, the key players in a market. You need to have their trust in order for them to volunteer the information, and it takes a lot of time as well. To sit in front of these people, they're not going to just give anyone the time of day to give you that key market information that they give to us now. But that's very much founded on the basis that we have long-term relationships with these with our partners. And understanding our clients' individual requirements. I mean, the dynamic industry that we live in, global insurance is incredibly dynamic and changeable. And it's very important for us to keep our fingers on the pulse and ensure that we know what the trends are so we can report accordingly. There's no point in us funneling the same information year in, year out without responding to the needs of the industry. So that's an important aspect. Just to go a little further about the, about the model, I've explained a little further there. Understanding our clients' individual requirements and interaction with our clients. All of these are fundamental to AXCO's very existence. And as alluded to earlier, things are moving on quite significantly on the technological scale. So Carol will take you through, right towards the end of the presentation, a few of our services which, as Johannes alluded to earlier, the complexities of compliance, the questions that you need to be aware of, the taxes. There's all sorts of tools and mechanisms which can help you through that process and make sure that you don't miss any crucial steps or sidestep any issues. So I've kind of glossed over how we get our information. It's very important. I mean, it's not just desk-based in London. We don't just sit there on Google and Google information. I'm sure that would be a lot easier. But no, for 40 years now, we've been sending industry experts and with people with experience in the industry to physically have, visit the countries that we report on. I mean, we report on 180 plus territories around the world, and we send our industry consultants. I mean, AXCO itself is quite small. We have 40, 50 staff in London, and we employ around 20 or 30 consultants who go out and travel around the world, and very lucky for them, although some of the locations aren't as desirable as, say, Stockholm, but no, lucky them. And so the primary source of information is the information that they procure on the ground. They go knock on the door of the regulator and sit down with them for 3-4 hours, over a course of days, and they have a detailed list of 3,500 questions and rattle through them day in, day out. It's quite laborious, but it gets the job done. And as alluded to earlier, it's very important. The long-term relationship aspect is crucial. They may withhold information if you don't know them particularly well. So the longer you know them, the better the information quality. It's not just the regulators or the associations that they meet, it's the key market players in those markets. So if you're going to a new far-off country, they meet with the presence on the ground, the brokers, the insurers, the reinsurers, and anyone really fundamental to the insurance market so that they can get a feel for how insurance is conducted in that market. It's not something you can get when you're sitting thousands of miles away on your computer. It's a sense that they get. And it's continued throughout, even when they're back, they carry on with email correspondence, copy the AXCO report. Once we finish the report, they hand it back to the regulators or their contacts. They can review all the information they've given, just in case that we haven't reported something they don't want us to share. Global user feedback is another continual importance with AXCO. We have continued contact with our clients, ERV, Munich Re, practically the whole insurance industry, and they review our information, and on a day-to-day basis, they give us feedback. And it's very important that loop of information is kept fresh and up to date. And our team, and there's several other teams which are hot on the heels of all the clients and make sure that they tell us where we're going wrong. Not that often, but sometimes it does happen. And we have a dedicated in-house research team who sit there on their computers the whole day and check and recheck the information and supplement the information with what the writers get when they move abroad. And finally, partners, partner associations, risk manager associations, insurance associations. We partner up, we share as much information with them, we collaborate with them, and they in turn give us a feel for the trends in certain markets and for certain industry players. But so it's a well-oiled machine. We've been doing it for quite some time, and but at the same time, we're not one to rest on our laurels. We're always looking to move forward and progress into new areas. And to that note, I will pass the reins over to Carol, who will talk you through the far more interesting side of this presentation.
Good morning, everyone. So Ali has taken the role of good cop, so I now step in as bad cop to talk to you about the business insurance side. So let's just get these points up here. Okay. So before we go into the complexities of business compliance, just to clarify, the purpose of this presentation is not to answer the questions that you may have, but it's to raise awareness. It's to make you question, when you look at structuring international policies in future, what do I need to be aware of? What do I need to know? What are the fines and penalties that could be imposed on me as an organisation if I do not comply? Okay, so it's a case of comply or die, as we say. So the challenges of international insurance are many, but just at the very top level. So we have international companies, globalization brings international risks. 196 countries in the world that we're aware of. Now, in terms of actual jurisdictions, there are in excess of 200 if you take into account some of the islands in the Pacific. Okay, but in terms of actual countries, 196. Looking at the way in which the market has developed, if you look at territories or countries such as Brazil, the regulatory landscape there is changing at a very rapid pace. If you look at somewhere like Ghana, for example, or some other African countries, it's changing at a much slower pace. Okay, so you need to consider, is it an emerging market in terms of the insurance industry, or is it developed, well-funded, and getting more intense? So the aims of regulations, so the laws are not designed to protect the international insurance companies, they are designed to protect the financial systems. As Johannes alluded to earlier, governments, how to raise money, how to swell their balance sheets. What easier way to do it than to look at the tax situation? Who hasn't been complying? And we are aware that in Canada, for example, the government there has gone back, I think, 5 or 10 years to look at who has not been complying over that period. So this is not new, but perhaps the rate at which regulators now and supervisors are looking at who hasn't complied is picking up momentum and is stepping up. Accepting grey answers, it is complex. Some of the insurance laws are not 100% clear as to what the situation is in terms of compliance. There are some grey areas there. We look at market practice. You need to be aware as well, what is the market practice in that territory? So this compliance abroad checklist, is there one more? Yep, is not intended to be exhaustive. Again, it's just raising awareness. What do I need to be aware of? You can see the points there. Taxes and charges, again, be aware, it's not just taxes that you need to be aware of, it's other levies, parafiscal charges. When we go through the journey here, we'll look at, say, writing a risk in Australia, which, as you know, is country level, state, federal level, and the different states as well. There are different taxes and charges that apply to different states. Just for awareness, in the US, for example, in Kentucky, there are 37 pages worth of taxes. No, I haven't read them, but we do have a tax team in AXCO whose job it is to research that level of detail. So just be aware, it's not always just Fed level, it's state level and then municipal level as well. So just taking on some of those points there on the compliance checklist. So just be aware of your market environment. So just taking two quite different examples. If we look at Ghana, if we look at Brazil, so the major differences there, we have the population. Look at the urbanization as well. So the higher the level of urbanization would indicate the more sophisticated the insurance market is. So a higher level of urbanization, you can see there in Brazil, we're looking at 84% compared to 52% in Ghana. Brazil, therefore, you would expect the insurance market to be more sophisticated in terms of life assurance, in terms of motor insurance, property, household homeowners type policies, commercial, industrial. You would expect, therefore, the premium spend and the insurance penetration to be higher than, say, in an African country. Look at the investment going into the country. We've used there for Brazil an example, World Cup, something to do with football apparently, and the Olympics as well, so lots of investment going into the country. It's on the world stage now, the world is focusing on Brazil, so therefore, how does that affect the insurance market there? Okay, natural resources, very different, oil, gold, as opposed to exports, gold, cocoa, for example, in Ghana. So again, just focusing on market environment. Just again, be aware of the what we're showing here is the GDP in Ghana and Brazil as opposed to the written premiums. So I don't know if you can see, it might be a bit small, but the scale on both is the same, it's 1 to 100. So in Brazil, for example, you can see the GDP rising up, okay, whereas the written premiums there, and this is to the end of 2012, the written premiums, as you can see, from around about 2001, 2002, it's risen quite exponentially. Okay, so again, be aware of the market environment. What are the reasons for that? If we look at Ghana, you can see there the curves, the GDP and gross written premium, kind of quite aligned. Okay, so it'd be interesting to see in Ghana what happens post 2012, 2013, 2014. Okay, so the purpose of this slide is, as we alluded to earlier, we're just talking you through how the regulation has changed over the years. So if we look at Ghana, it can take the process to have a law enacted through Parliament, can take several years, whereas if we look at Brazil, it can be a very quick process. Okay, so the example we've given there is that between 1989 and 2006, there have been 3 kind of major changes, whereas if you have a look at Brazil, 2006 to 2009, that's 3 years, that's 4 different resolutions passed in that 3-year period. And those resolutions, as we've said there, was just to set out the basis of premium and loss reserve. So that's a rapidly changing landscape in terms of regulation and control. One more, nope, excuse me. Okay, so before we start our journey, we're just going to look at here at the very top level, the 4 main ways in which to write international business. So we can look at admitted, where the policy is issued locally from a locally authorized company. Cross-border agreements, for example, FOS. Fronting, using a local office and reinsure it back. Non-admitted, where the insurer is not authorized by that supervisor in that country to write the business. Okay, so if we just have a very quick look at what is meant by non-admitted or unlicensed. So I'll just give you a few seconds or so to digest that paragraph there. So some of you may be aware of this already, but crucially, what is meant by non-admitted or unlicensed? Okay, so non-admitted insurance refers to the placing of insurance outside of the jurisdiction of the country in which the risk is based. Okay, so let's start our journey. Right, map of the world. So we're looking at a Swedish insurer. That big dot there is supposed to represent Sweden. So let's have a look here. So what we're going to do now is just take you on a little travel around the world. So we're looking at a Swedish insurer writing a policy in Sweden. On what basis can they write that? Moving further afield, the second cross just there is Spain. Moving down a bit into Egypt, down into Western Africa to Ghana, across to South America, Brazil, down to Australia, and we'll have a look at the different ways in which, to be business compliant, you can write insurance. Okay. So starting off with Sweden. So we're looking at writing here local policy. So we're writing it on an admitted basis. So the insurer has been authorized by the supervisor in Sweden to provide insurance services. So we're using a locally licensed and regulated company. So what are the pros here for doing it on this basis, on an admitted basis? So with a local insurer, you would expect the local insurer to have a good relationship, a good dialogue with the regulator, frequent discussions taking place. They should be aware of the local regulations, and therefore they should have the resource and the processes to make sure they abide by them. Okay, just be aware again, raising awareness that certain compulsory insurances in the country have to be placed with insurers who have been specifically authorized by the supervisor to write that class of business. Okay. In terms of the insurance market in Sweden, it is sophisticated. Several multinational companies have presence in Sweden. Therefore, there shouldn't really be a need to look outside of Sweden, looking to write most lines of business. Okay, so we go a bit further afield now, looking at Spain. Okay, so again, insurer in Sweden, looking at a risk located in Spain. What are the options we have to write this? We can look at writing this under Freedom of Services, FOS. So FOS legislation was created to create one single insurance market. Okay, so an insurer in one EEA, not EU, in one EEA member state can provide insurance services to another EEA member state, provided that they notify the supervisor in their home country. Okay, so FOS is an international agreement. What are the benefits of this? It's as if the insurer is locally licensed. Taxes and charges, again, just raising awareness. Is the tax liability attaching to Sweden, where the insurer is, or does the tax liability attach to where the risk is located? So some of you may be aware of the Caverna ruling, which the ruling of that is that the tax liability, so insurance premium tax, must be paid to the supervisor in the country in which the risk is located, not where the insurer is based. Okay, so again, just be aware of certain things relating to taxes. So some of the benefits of FOS, moving outside of the EEA zone, some of the French territories and islands such as Guadeloupe, French Guiana, they can also be subject to FOS because those territories apply French law in their entirety, and they are classed as regions of France. Okay, so again, just something to be aware of. Some of the downsides of FOS, we're using the example of Ireland. If you're writing a risk located in Ireland, just be aware that even if you're not writing it using an Irish entity, or if the insurer is not headquartered in Ireland, you are still obliged to pay a supervisory levy there. Okay, and if you don't do it, you're not compliant. Okay, so where's our next trip? Egypt. So outside FOS, we don't have a presence there. So how can we look to write this business? So we can look up to set up a locally licensed office. So note, not a branch of the Swedish entity, but actual local office based in Egypt. So the pros there, to have local presence there in Egypt, it would give you a high level of compliance confidence. For the insured, for the buyer, they have a local broker. They have local policy wording issued. Premium payment and terms should mirror that imposed by the Swedish entity. There is local capacity there to be tapped into. Some of the cons, again, to get that local knowledge, you need to have the investment there to employ local expertise. What are the demands of the supervisor if you're looking to set up a local office in Egypt? We are aware, and as reported in the Egyptian insurance market report, to the supervisor, you need to submit your business plan for the next 5 years, and we understand that you need a starting capital of, I think it's 8.6 million US at present. So may not be seen as a con, but again, if you don't have that level of investment, just again be aware of these requirements before you actually look to write business in this way. Okay, next, go into Australia. So Australia here, we see there, so non-admitted is permitted. Okay, so even if I'm not authorised by the supervisor to provide insurance services in Australia, I am permitted to do it if it's at the insured's initiative. But again, be aware certain compulsory classes, such as workers' compensation, do need to be written by insurers that have been given specific authority by the supervisor in that country. Okay, so taxes and charges, Australia, as you would probably expect, like Canada and the US, bit of a minefield. There's a federal level and then there are the state levels as well. So we understand that with the exception of GST, goods and services tax, there is the taxes and charges for non-admitted are the same as admitted policies. Okay, so for example, there is what they call a deemed profits tax of 3%, not 0.3%, but 3% of the premium, which can be quite high. And there are also fire services levies as well imposed in Tasmania, New South Wales you need to be aware of. And also as well, there are some other supervisory levies as well that apply to different states depending on the policies you're writing and depending on the premium that's going through the books there. Some downsides of doing this in Australia, if we're doing it non-admitted, is claims management. So if you are based in Sweden, for example, time difference, how effective can that claims management process be? So again, just issues to be aware of. Okay, so where are we now? Brazil. Non-admitted is not permitted. Big red cross there. So how can we look to do this? We can look to use a fronting partner. If you're looking at a one-off risk in Brazil, a fronting may not be the most cost-effective way of doing it. Before engaging a fronting partner, you should, again, due diligence, know your customer, know your fronter. You know, how accessible are, for example, the up-to-date financials of the fronting partner you're looking to use? Is there sufficient information there? Are you aware of all the local regulations? If you're looking to build a long-term partnership there and writing more business in Brazil, a fronter could be the right way of doing it. Okay. Again, awareness, complexities there. A fronter would write the policy for you and reinsure it back. So again, you would be exposed to reinsurance taxes, and the reinsurance taxes in Brazil are, suffice to say, fairly complex in nature. Okay. Again, just some things to note about Brazil. There are exceptions to that non-admitted is permitted, and these include where coverage is not available in the local market, or where, for example, there's lack of interest in the country, in Brazil, for providing that level of cover. You may be aware that where there are less than 10 companies operating in that relevant class of business, you are required to approach each of those companies before you must consult all those companies who write it before you can consider other options. Okay, Ghana, so absolutely big red cross. Non-admitted is not permitted. Okay, so what happens here? So we're not looking at a fronting partner, it's too expensive, we can't meet with the supervisor's requirements to set up a local office here. What happens if we just say, okay, fine, I understand it's not permitted, but let's just go ahead and do it anyway. So what are the consequences? Penalties. We understand that the Ghanaian authorities can impose fines of up to 2,500 penalty points, one penalty point being an amount at a given time set by the supervisor. Could be a prison term, up to 5 years for non-compliance. That applies to countries such as South Korea as well, where non-compliance would be 5 years. I mean, frankly, would you want to spend 5 years in jail for non-compliance? I wouldn't, personally. Some of you may think differently. You may think it's worth it. Reputational damage. So just to use an example here as well, we'd use the example of an international, major global sportswear brand whose headquarters were in Germany, and they had a master policy in Germany which covered a subsidiary in India. Okay, so the Indian subsidiary suffered a fire in the warehouse and submitted a claim through the parent company under the global master policy for, I think it was about 20 million US dollars. Okay, so the insurer assessed the claim, fine, we're liable, so paid the corporate parent $20 million, and the corporate parent then wired that money through to the Indian subsidiary. The Indian authorities notified big claim payment coming into India. What's this all about? So the company argued, well, actually, the policy was written outside of India, nothing to do with India, and it's written by an insurer outside of India, so therefore don't tax us on it because it's nothing to do with you guys. The Indian supervisor decided not so, Because the money was seen to be income to the Indian subsidiary, it was paid back to India to benefit that subsidiary, and therefore they taxed the 20 million claim payment. So there, it's not just financial damage to the company, it's the reputational damage as well. So without giving away too much information, I guess in their case, it was a case of just don't do it as opposed to just do it. Sorry, bad joke. I told you I was the bad cop. Okay. So just as a recap here, this colourful slide, which you can study in more detail when you get the presentation. You can see very quickly here the different locations where you're looking to write business potentially, the different ways in which you can write it, and some of the penalties that you may incur for non-compliance. Okay, how can AXCO help? So as Ali was saying before, it's not so much who we are. I mean, you've seen two of us. We are human people, but it's more what we are. So we're employed by the industry to be the industry's feet on the ground. So we employ insurance consultants, professionals who visit their assigned countries for up to a week at a time. They talk to the regulators, they get information to feed back to you, the insurance professionals. So some companies that we deal with have tried to replicate the AXCO model themselves before and very quickly find that the costs very quickly add up into the hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. And it's not just the startup cost that you need to be concerned with, but it's the maintenance, the updating of that information as well, which can cost you money. So we just very quickly have a look at, I'll gloss over this. This is not really a sales pitch, but it's more raising awareness. So just looking at 3 of the products that AXCO currently offers, again, just raising awareness how the information there can help you assess the challenges of writing international insurance and to be compliant. The insurance market report, we have a life report as well, but just focusing here on non-life. So the chapter headings, which you probably can't see on the left-hand side, they delve into areas such as supervision and control. What do I need to be aware of? Legislation, projected legislation coming up, and existing legislation. Taxation, what are the complexities of the taxation, the levies, the parafiscal charges, and then it goes down into the main lines of business, for example, property, marine, energy, and it will give you some information on the lines of business, and it gives you some information on the statistics as well. And just looking at the delegate list, those of you from the major broking firms, you may be aware that you have access to this already. And if I can just be good cop for a second, it's all paid for centrally, so if you were to access this, it wouldn't cost you anything. So please do. As Ali was saying before, over the past 5 years, we have invested quite heavily, quite significantly in different, how should we say, delivery mechanisms. Okay, so prior to the technology coming in, the insurance market report, if you bear in mind that the non-life report on average can be 250 to 300 pages in depth. So when that was bound as a book, it was quite chunky. Okay, so we recognize that it's all very well providing you with this content, but if it's not usable, frankly, if I had a book of 300 pages for each country, I would be less inclined to go through it. So we're looking at delivering content through technology, delivery platforms. Insight Compliance, it breaks down the key Q&As for regulation into short form answers with the questions. The highlighted bit in green here shows you that the platform, the interface through which it's delivered, enables you to add your own corporate compliance, your in-house rules of the road as well. So it's an integrated tool that your employees can use, providing the AXCO content together with your in-house content as well. Compliance point, just touching on this briefly, this is again Q&A, and it actually encourages the user to input the salient points of their international insurance market program. So you enter your risk location, you enter the lines of business you're looking to write on, you enter the premium there, and the intelligent questioning mechanism will ask you relevant questions, closed questions, meaning that the answer is either yes or no, and it will help you structure it, and it will then go through to the end, to the tax calculator, and it will enable you to see there, to be tax compliant, what do I need to be aware of? Okay, so Ali and I will be around afterwards if you want to talk about any of these points. And that, in a nutshell, is it. So if anyone is interested in product demos or you want to come and see us afterwards, please do approach us. So hopefully that hasn't scared you, but again, just be aware that moving targets, this thing of business compliance is very much here to stay, and please don't end up in jail for 5 years because of non-compliance.